Before we jump into today's episode, I want to make sure you don't miss this time-sensitive bit of information. If you're hearing this audio announcement, what that means is that we are currently open for enrollment in the Pathway to Peace coaching community. And if you have been listening to this podcast, whether it's your first or 50th episode, it's the next practical step of going from listening. Well, I mean, you came to the podcast obviously because you wanted to be seen, to be understood, to be with other moms experiencing what you are experiencing. And so this is the next logical step for you to join into a community that is designed for you and acknowledges that you are a busy mom on the go and maybe can't even imagine adding more to your plate. So just keep in mind, it's designed not to feel like a heavy lift or to be really intensive, but it is designed to be transformative. And this community is the community that can help you start breaking up the feeling or the experience of being alone as a special needs mom. I say you deserve to at least check it out, to learn more, to see if it's a right fit for you. And you can do so by finding the link with all the information in the show notes of this and every episode during this open enrollment week. Don't delay. Enrollment ends March 1st, 2026. We'll see you there. Enjoy the episode. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. Okay, we have a guest today, an incredible woman, and I'm very excited to introduce her. She was recommended to me by one of our dear Pathway to Peace community members and my friend. And I'll give her formal introduction in a moment, but I want to tell you a little bit about what to expect in the episode. And a line that really sticks out with me as she was describing the undercurrent of her experience. And a line she said was, "I was supposed to show up okay." And I was like, oh, boom. I feel that one deep. Because as special needs moms, we are the front line. We are doing all the things. We are holding it all together. And then we're supposed to show up okay. I mean, that's what we sometimes tell ourselves. Whether that's true or not, that's a whole nother conversation. But it's like, how do we do all of this and hold it and then show up like, we got this all figured out? Like in the IEP meetings and, in spaces where maybe it's not totally expected to bear your whole story. What else in this episode? We talked about, what it looks like for Erin to dig deep. And she has some language that you'll hear in the episode that I just really loved, and I highlighted it. And I think essentially she's talking about the exploration of what digging deep looked like for her. And it wasn't just trying harder. I'll tell you that. And I think it was a great model of kind of a way of being that will give us access to what that looks like for ourselves. And, Erin and I talk about it in the episode. It's not the same for any of us, but hearing one another's story helps highlight our own story, and in a way that I think honors the uniqueness and wholeness of who each of us is. Okay, let's tell you a little bit more about Erin from a little formal standpoint. Erin Popp is a licensed educational psychologist with more than 30 years of experience supporting children, adolescents, and families across educational and clinical settings, and over 35 years working with individuals with special needs. She spent much of her career in Southern California school districts, working as a psychologist and intervention specialist, where she conducted psychoeducational assessments, providing counseling, and collaborated with multidisciplinary teams within the IEP process. She now owns a private practice where she focuses her clinical work on psychotherapy with adolescents and adults. Her areas of expertise include learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorder, anxiety, depression, trauma, grief, adolescence, parenting, and chronic illness. She's known for helping families and individuals navigate complex emotional and developmental challenges with both practical guidance and deep compassion. Erin is also certified as a spiritually informed therapist who thoughtfully integrates psychological and spiritual perspectives in ways that honor each client's beliefs, preferences, and goals. Her work centers on helping people find meaning, resilience, and healing through life's most difficult transitions. And what her formal bio does not necessarily include is her personal story that intersects so beautifully to really develop her. And if you look at her career, she was the school psychologist that was sitting across the table and giving us all those assessments that we were supposed to fill out. And then she had her own experience as a mother that radically transformed what it looked like for her to support parents and families and children, of course, in that way. And I think that's where you're really going to connect with hearing how her story, again, intersects with your and I story. So without further ado, Erin, welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast.
Oh, hi. Thanks so much for inviting me. I love the work you're doing. And I think the community that you've created for parents is so meaningful and so needed.
Well, thank you. Yes, you were highly recommended by a dear friend who I trust, respect, and admire. So I was like, basically anybody she sends over, I'd be like, yes, without even knowing you. But then as I've gotten to, we've interacted a little bit as we prepared for the show. I don't know, even just our conversation before we hit record, I'm like, oh, there's so many things we have to talk about. They're just, I think as we've, you and I, and of course the listeners, have navigated all the different parts of our professions and how it intersects with our personal life, and just so much, like, I guess, unfolding and so much learning about who we are and how we process things and how to support ourselves through that. So that's ultimately what this conversation is going to be about. But let's get you better introduced to this community. And I want to look at two different parts of you, and that is personal and professional. So let's start with who you are as a professional.
Okay. As a professional, I've been working as a psychologist for more than 30 years now. A large part of my work has been centered on children and adolescents with special needs and their families. But I actually started working with children with physical impairments and visual impairments 35 years ago when I was working through undergrad. Yeah, I just felt really passionate about it. So after I graduated grad school, I began working in Southern California public schools as a psychologist supporting kids with IEPs. And I did a lot of work specifically with adolescents who were really navigating severe emotional behavioral challenges and learning difficulties. So that was all, that was 22 years before I opened my private practice and left the school.
So it's funny, as I'm, hearing you talk about the kids you supported, it's also the kid that I have. And thinking about you on the other side and kind of being the professional doing these assessments and being that person in the IEP room that plays such a critical role, not just in the professional assessments, but kind of setting the tone for being part of the support team. Yes. So let's jump. We're going to make a quick jump to say, okay, that's a little bit about who you are professionally. And now let's jump over to the personal and how that kind of all maybe intertwined at some point.
Yes, because I went off the rails, I would say. I think my kids always had, medical challenges when they were younger. But when my daughter was a teenager, she was 14, she started exhibiting some really scary symptoms that she was vomiting constantly. She was passing out frequently, and she had mobility issues, which were really scary. And her health was declining very rapidly. And it took about 4 or 5 years of seeing bazillions of specialists and getting kind of ridiculous type of answers
Mm-hmm.
until we got something that made sense. And she was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and POTS. Those are the main ones. And then a couple more years for us to seek treatments in various cities and states for her. While the meantime, my son, who's younger, began facing his own medical struggles, which we're still on that path. But it's been, I would say, 10 years of a lot of living with medical uncertainty and that, invisible grief, I think. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt so isolated. I felt so alone because it really felt like it was hard to find community. That's why I just think what you provide for people is so deeply meaningful and needed because I felt so alone and I felt like I was supposed to show up places and be okay when
Uh-huh. Yeah.
nothing felt okay. And I mean, I even had people say like, I don't do sad, it was like, wow. I mean, I am a level of sad that you can't possibly imagine because there is nothing worse than watching your child suffer.
And I want to dive into that because you had shared with me earlier that, especially from a professional standpoint, that you understood intellectually fear
Yeah.
and all, and grief and sadness,
Mhm.
but that watching your children suffer was a profoundly different experience. And I
Oh.
would love to hear a little bit more about kind of differentiating the intellectual understanding versus
Mhm.
actually you experiencing that.
Yeah. It's hard to even put into words. It's so profound. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I'd done I can't even tell you countless hours of trainings in trauma and grief and anxiety and stress and chronic stress and you hear things people say things like, oh, self-care, take care of yourself and do
Mm-hmm.
do these, put the oxygen mask on first. And when you're living under those types of conditions with your children and you're on like what feels like a life and death roller coaster every day, self-care is a concept that is so ridiculous. Like, I don't know. I mean, I know people mean well, but it wasn't really, it wasn't possible a lot of times. Like, what does self-care mean, I guess, you know?
Well, yeah, there's that, right? And so I definitely want to validate that experience. It's like telling somebody that's in the middle of the ocean,
Mhm.
treading water, just
Mhm.
trying to keep their head above water, quite
Yeah.
literally to stay alive, to say, "Oh, don't forget to go paint those nails." And
Yeah.
clearly
Right.
that's not necessarily even self-care, but I use that
Right.
example to be kind of like hyperbolic about it. But
Yeah.
just recognizing, and then a lot of self-care lands on moms as one more thing to do. And I've talked in detail about that. I don't think that that's what self-care is. And I
I
think it's
know,
really more of a
for sure.
relationship. But
Mhm.
I do think that I think people don't know what else to say. So they're like,
Yeah.
oh, take care of yourself.
Right.
Look at
Yeah.
that. Are you getting massages? No.
Yeah.
But anyhow, back to the topic. So, you had the professional expertise. And yet what I hear is that you were still experiencing all of the things you technically knew how to treat,
Yes.
yet you were still experiencing. And what do you make of that now?
I mean, I think it took years for me to understand like what self-care could look like. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in a how could that work in my life? How could I take care of myself so that I can keep giving on a continuous, minute to minute, hour to hour
Mm-hmm.
basis at home? And for me, it was a long, long journey because of learning. Well, I never wanted to meditate before, and I really dove deep into that because what I really found relief in that, just finding like, just a few minutes to clear your mind and ground yourself. That's what self-care ended up being for me. Just those
Mm-hmm.
minutes of peace during the day to be able to access it and find it.
Yeah.
So it was
Nice.
so different from what I thought self-care was, or even all the strategies and the trauma-informed approaches that you use when you're working clinically.
Yeah.
survival, I guess, just had a whole different meaning, and I had to dig so deep for it. And that wasn't something that I could have ever understood clinically before my own personal experiences. I don't know if
Hmm.
that answers your
It
question.
definitely does. And if it's okay, what's really sticking out to me is what you just said is I had to dig so deep for it.
Yeah.
And so for as much as you can remember, like what did that look like for you? And describe a little bit of the experience of that digging.
Yeah. So I have to throw in, I had maybe 6 to 8 years, I think, of my children really having these severe medical complex challenges. And then my younger brother walked into the ER with what we thought was a very treatable infection, and he died within hours. And the devastation that I felt and the overwhelming grief was I don't still have words for it really. It's just like some people refer to it as the dark night of the soul, where
Hmm.
you're walking through the world and you see that the world is the same and you can't make sense of it. Like everything internally feels so different. And so in the state of such profound grief, digging deep for me, I was finding nature. I did
Hmm.
a lot of crazy things. I would, some days when I was so consumed by grief, it would just be like get myself outside to stare at the clouds
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
center myself, like just focus on the clouds and what they're doing. I know it sounds crazy, or getting outside to see the birds in my backyard. And I think from that point, I really started learning about meditation to try to calm the panic that was happening nonstop inside my brain,
Hmm.
and breath work and learning to really ground myself, and that's to reset my nervous system, because my nervous system was on, like, it is just going off the rails, hyper, vigilance, hyper alert, 24/7.
And what I want to add here is, and the reason I'm asking a lot about this is I think that this is an area where we can both be experts and beginners at the very same time. And what I mean by that, especially for like you and I, like we have a very intellectual understanding of what it takes to do all these things. Yet we also experience all of the anxiety and the fear and the deep grief and all of these things, right? That we technically,
Mhm.
I don't want to say simplifying it, but technically have the answers for.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think that, and you're just talking about, and I love the way you're talking about it. I did a lot of crazy things, meaning you tried a lot of crazy shit,
I
thinking
did.
maybe this will work.
Yeah.
But I
Mhm.
think, and I really want to highlight and I acknowledge that, like that experimental, like I'm going to keep trying something until it helps, being in the pursuit
Mhm.
of well-being and of being grounded. And I think, and this is the thing where I think what I mean by we are both experts and beginners at the same time is I think it takes getting out of our expert mind to be able to experience the groundingness that we all desire. And so it's like you have to let go of all that you know
Mhm.
in your thinking mind to then actually experience the work in your body. And that
Mhm.
for a lot of us, to let go of the control that we have in thinking and analyzing and knowing
Mhm.
is deeply vulnerable. And actually, it's a learned skill that many of us haven't practiced yet. And also, I'll add, even if we have practiced, it still is difficult. And I will be very transparent saying, like, I have a very deep understanding intellectually, and I don't know that that's helpful.
Yeah. Mhm.
Maybe it gets in the way.
Yeah.
And that's where, for me, I think my persistence to kind of always be talking about community, 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 we cannot do this on our own, is
Yeah.
because that has been the most effective tool for me to
Mhm.
be supported by other human beings, to be held in those spaces of
Mhm.
becoming grounded and reconnected. And I'd love to hear your take on this, even in the experience of grief, that grief is not designed to be a solo sport, that
Yeah.
actually we are designed to be with one another. And so, what
Mhm.
are your thoughts? Like, even as I'm, kind of, I don't know, just talking about all this stuff, because I
Mhm.
get pretty passionate about it. What are your thoughts on the aspect of doing this work in community?
I mean, I think it's life-saving to do this work in community because we all want to be seen and understood in our experiences here.
Yeah.
And I think that was a lot of my personal struggle was really trying to find community because people seemed really afraid of the grief
Mm.
that I was
Mm-hmm.
bringing. And I was just like, I am showing my grief all over the place. I can't seem to hide it anymore.
Mm.
I couldn't go places and appear fine at all.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
for me, community, to find community that you can be your authentic self and have the space to be authentic and true to what you're experiencing just means everything.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about even a moment last week where I couldn't hide my grief anymore, right? Like it was bubbling up and I was not able to, as you said, to show up okay. And I was okay with that.
Mhm.
What's also coming to my mind, and if it feels perhaps like something you're not ready to talk about, I very much want you to say so. But you've shared that, the grief of your brother's passing really
Mhm.
was for you what really called you to grieve in a whole new way.
Yeah.
And what's coming up for me is perhaps the grief you were already experiencing
Hmm.
with the undiagnoses and the diagnoses of your children.
Hmm.
That is a type of grief that I think is even more challenging
Hmm.
to have other people understand. So,
Yeah.
if you went to an average room and described what you were going through with your children, I don't think most people would say, "Oh, you're experiencing grief."
Hmm.
But if you
Right.
share what happened tragically to your brother with your brother, they would all expect you to grieve.
Hmm.
And so I don't know. I guess I wonder if you would just speak to that maybe from your experience, particularly how we, as a special needs mom community, can help, I guess, create more spaces where it's okay to grieve
Yeah.
because we all recognize that that's what's happening. I don't know. What are your thoughts as I kind of,
I mean, I guess they need to come up with a term for that, don't they? It's like
yeah,
we just
they
came up
do.
with, well, we just came up with the term, now it's very common. You hear complex trauma,
Yes.
and we understand how to treat complex trauma. And it's
Hmm.
like, it's very similar to complex grief, I think. It's the same concept where we used to think, post-traumatic stress, you always thought a trauma was one event. And it
Yeah.
took us a long time to learn how much more challenging complex
Hmm.
trauma is when you have repeated traumas happening. And I think that grief feels very much the same. And I think that's you explain it so well, and that's really what was happening with my children. And I felt so alone. And
Yeah.
I couldn't find people really for a very long time that really could understand what I was going through. And I withdrew from so many
Hmm.
people because it was
Hmm.
like, I don't know how to show up how you want me to show up, and I can't do it.
Or yeah, there's so much there because I relate to that a lot of I'm thinking back even to I remember we were facing, so my son's story is that he's a multiple brain tumor survivor. And his first tumor when he was age 2. And then right when he was turning 12, he was diagnosed with recurrence. Well, actually say it was right after he was 12. And so, of course, my husband and I are processing that information and doing all that one needs to
Mhm.
deal with the actual medical part of it. But then there was the telling friends and family and community. And even now, as I'm talking about it, I can start to feel it deep in my core
Mhm.
and just how it's already so fragile. It's like I'm already barely holding it together.
Yeah.
And then to disclose to another human being that's going to have their own responses
Yeah.
that then ultimately my therapist told me, actually, no, it was a really dear friend of mine, a coaching friend. And she was like, Carrie, you're not responsible for other people's emotional responses.
Yeah.
And something intellectually I could understand,
Yeah.
but experientially, I think being with their emotion, any of it, was too
Hmm.
much. And so
Yeah.
the idea of sharing transparently what was going on it was like I just didn't want to,
Hmm.
And so I think that for very understandable reasons, I think that's where a lot of times, like, we want to be known, we want to be seen,
Hmm.
but we can get a little stuck.
Yeah, for sure. Did you get a lot of people that say, "Oh, you don't have to talk about it," or something?
I'm trying to
You
think. I
get
don't
that?
think so. Well,
I would
because
get.
I can go to a very stoic place where
Mhm.
people will be like, "Are you a human or are you a robot?" I'd be like, "I'm a robot."
Yeah.
A very happy
Well,
robot. Leave me alone.
yeah.
Yeah. So I can,
So you're armored up, kind of.
yeah, I can armor up pretty well. And actually, I
Yeah.
know that's even a joke with a former therapist was like, I would have made a great soldier because
Mhm.
I can
Wow.
operate very functionally
Yeah.
in a really stressful situation where I am much more challenged is in the processing the emotional impacts of all of those things. So
Mhm.
I feel like because of how I showed up, I think people maybe weren't as sensitive to trying to
Mm.
like calm me down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because yeah, I'm kind of, my emotions are out there.
You're not the robot that I am.
No, it's taken me a long time. I was always seen as like, "Oh, you're too sensitive. You're so much," because my
Uh-huh.
emotions are very intense. But yeah, I've learned to be much less emotionally reactive. And
Together we're a perfect pair.
exactly, we balance each other out. I was like,
Ah.
I hope that I don't cry during our conversation today because this is all like, yeah, it's all emotional stuff.
It is. Yeah. And crying is always welcome here. I
Oh,
was crying
thank
last
you.
week when I was recording on my own,
Yeah.
which is a little easier because like you can edit out like the space it takes to
Uh,
cry.
yeah.
So,
I mean, now I'm just like, oh, good. I got all that out. I released it. There goes
mhm,
another layer of healing, shoo, until the
mhm.
next week when there's another layer.
Yeah, until there's the next layer.
For-
Exactly.
That's for sure.
Okay. So let's keep the conversation kind of in a similar place. So you mentioned something that your personal experiences, like with just within this medical uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen next
Mhm.
chronically. And, I think it's one thing to have something one time, but to chronically have uncertainty, which is, I think, the
Yeah.
experience of special needs moms, whether it's behaviorally
Yeah.
or whether it's medically. And I think from an emotional processing standpoint, they hit very similarly,
Hmm.
even though externally they look very different.
Hmm.
So, how, if we're going to talk about, okay, so this is a condition of being a special needs mom, how
Hmm.
can we stay connected to like hope and meaning or even spirituality when we are dealing with all of this uncertainty and, of course, overwhelm and even just the like unfairness of it all?
I know, right? I mean, under those conditions, it's so extremely difficult because it's just chronic
Hmm.
hypervigilance,
Hmm.
chronic, you know, grief. And I can only say, I guess, what worked for me, personally. And that doesn't, and I am always so careful about that, even when even in the conversation of spirituality, because, I honor what anyone else's belief system is. And I don't put my framework onto anyone else. So it's not because I feel like sometimes that can be like so much pressure. You've got to see the silver lining, or you've got to like stay in a positive mindset. And when you're in the trenches, like
Hmm.
that is the hardest thing to do, is to find, I think, hope and meaning. For me, I guess, I just dove deep into all the spiritual teachings, anything that I could get my hands on, I read or listened to, that helped me find a state of peace and, knowing that I can't control everything.
Hmm.
So, I
Hmm.
mean, it doesn't answer your question about finding hope and connection. I mean, for me, it was finding signs in my everyday life,
Hmm.
spiritual signs that led me to believe in something greater than
Hmm.
than us, that we are spiritual beings, that we're not alone
Hmm.
in this existence, I guess. I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of,
Well, I think what stands out to me is even what you had said before, or what we had talked about before, about like how you said, I did a lot of crazy things and how you were in this process of experimenting with what worked for you. And so when I asked this question, right, you're like, well, what worked for me? And I think it's so important to actually acknowledge that anybody claiming that they have the guidebook, that they have the answer, you're
Yeah.
just going to want to not listen to them. No, just kidding. You're going to want to say, well, that's great,
Hmm.
but listen to your own wisdom
Yeah.
and guidance. And that's where I think what's beautiful about you being willing to share yourself with this community is I think when we see other moms
Hmm.
that we know have deep understanding of what we've experienced, what we
Hmm.
are experiencing, and we see them finding hope, having things that worked. It's a very hopeful experience,
Hmm.
right? Not because you have all the answers,
Hmm.
but because you're on the journey and you have found some things that work. So that
Yeah.
gives me hope that, like, okay, so it's not always going to be
Yeah.
all of the fear and uncertainty, like that there is a way to navigate that.
Hmm.
And it's one of the ways is by talking about it like we are right now,
Hmm.
and then finding the ways that we are uniquely able to access that. And that is different for everybody. And that's why I love this like idea of experimenting and doing a lot of crazy things is because it's not a one size fits all. You're, a different person than I am. So therefore it's not going to
Hmm.
be like there's not a recipe.
Yeah.
And if there was, I would have found it by now.
I know. I mean, I can be a little more specific in the route I took. I think one of the very first books I probably read, oh, I don't know if I should back up to tell you the story about my brother, but after my experiences, after my brother's passing, I had some crazy,
Yeah, let's hear them.
unexplainable experiences that kind of would lead me to the next step, to find my own answers and find meaning in all of this suffering, I guess. But so when my brother passed, I told you he passed 4 years ago. He walked into the ER with what we thought was a very treatable infection, and he died within a couple of hours. I said, and I mean, I was just in overwhelming state of grief. And our new term, we're going to call it complex grief.
Yes, I think that is actually a term, but I think we're
Okay.
we're going to claim it as our own.
Yes, exactly. So a few months after his passing, my family and I traveled 500 miles to Northern California to do his celebration of life. And at one point, one of the days we got into the rental car and the screen went black. And then it said connecting to Jason's iPhone, Jason, my brother. And we didn't have his phone, and all of his services had been disconnected at that point. And I mean, it literally shocked me out of my grief. And I was trying to make sense of it. What are the logical explanations? We hadn't seen any phones that were still connected, programmed into the car. So that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, maybe we're driving down the street and somebody outside tried to connect to our car. Their name is Jason, whatever. And then a few days later, we traveled a few hundred miles to Napa Valley, and I was visiting places I'd gone with him, and the car did it again. The screen went blank and then connected to his iPhone. And then I heard 3 songs played that were very meaningful for our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, whoa, I mean, this seems deeper than that, deeper than a coincidence. And then my husband and I traveled to the East Coast and rented a car, which also connected to Jason's iPhone. So from that point, I was like, holy smokes. I I just don't think I can ignore that, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the very first books I read was Laura Lynn Jackson's The Light Between Us and then Signs. I don't know if you've
Mm-hmm.
read
I don't
her
know either one
stuff.
of them, but yeah.
But the light between us it talks about connection and our connection that doesn't die when someone passes away. And the book about signs is that you can ask the universe, spirit, whatever you want to call your belief in something bigger than us, connectedness, you can ask for specific signs. And so I started testing out the universe, and I would ask for really specific signs, which again were crazy, but they would happen. One of the things, because she said, make it specific, And so I told my husband, I was like, okay, I randomly pulled out, I said, I want to see a beaver. We live in Southern California. I'm not going to accept a YouTube video of a beaver, and I'm not going to accept a stuffed animal beaver. Um,
I
and
love it.
like a month later, we were seated in a restaurant that the whole restaurant was covered with license plates on the ceiling, and the license plate above us said beaver.
Oh, that's funny. That's
And
wild. Yeah, you're
I
like,
was
huh.
just like, thank you. So
Mm-hmm.
I know that all of this sounds crazy, but for me, it was so deeply comforting
Mm-hmm.
in a time that I had trouble finding hope or meaning or connectedness. And so it was a real learning process. And I mean, my reading just continued. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
lots of spiritual teachers in lots of different areas helped me find meaning again.
Yeah. And I think you said it earlier. I'm trying to think, maybe it was when we were talking prior to recording, but what's coming up for me as you talk is the access to peace.
Mhm.
And again, recognizing people have different spiritual traditions. Mine is of a Christian tradition, a Christian faith. So for me, my higher power, I call him God.
Mhm.
And, but I think what's universal in talking today, and I would think what a lot of people can acknowledge is like that there's something bigger than us.
Mhm.
And so, however we describe that, knowing that there's something bigger than us, like so
Mhm.
much bigger than us, like when we really stop and like, even look at the clouds, like that is clearly like all of this is a lot bigger than us.
Yeah.
That for me is when I'm able to really accept that part that I am held inside of something so much bigger
Mhm.
and more powerful and for me more loving and vast, that
Mhm.
that is where, okay, I can have peace here. It doesn't make sense here. It does not make sense. This pain and suffering does not make sense, but I can still have peace.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about your experience with kind of accessing peace through the spiritual experiences that you're describing.
Yeah, again, hard to put into words, I think, because I've had so many experiences through meditation, I think,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
going within
hmm
myself. I felt more love than I have ever felt in my entire life when I could go within and I guess connect to my soul, to God, to spirit. And so when I do it, I practice daily for sure because my anxiety brain and will easily go into panic mode over all the things that I can't control with people's health and that kind of thing. And so for me, I start every day, I go within to clear all of that thinking that's happening, which
hmm
kind of reminded me of what we were talking about earlier about like everything being so intellectual because I'd spent my lifetime being highly logical and I'm gonna figure everything out
hmm
and control all of it with my powerful brain. And
Yes.
then I was like, oh wow, I have to learn a whole different way to be in this world. So it was actually clearing everything out of my mind to find complete emptiness and space and connect. I call it like I connect to my heart. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's when I feel peace because all the noise is clear and all the panic.
Yeah. Well, I think it's that shift that out of your mind and connected to your heart specifically.
Yeah.
And there is a really clever saying about that. Like the longest distance is like from your head to your heart. Is this
Oh,
ringing a bell? There
that,
is a
yeah, please
saying.
ring
I
a
don't
bell.
know it. I feel like I'm notorious for like mostly knowing sayings and then trying, like,
Yeah.
this does not work. You should
You're
not
like,
have
it's
tried that,
close. It's
Kara.
close. I can't think. Yeah. Hmm.
Not helpful. Half of an analogy. Yeah, and that's where I think that in that, you know, I tend to attract women exactly that. The women that have spent their lifetime being successful
Hmm.
using their intellect to solve
Hmm.
all of their problems.
Yeah.
And that is wonderful. There's nothing wrong with that. And
Terrific.
then they get to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrific, right?
Uh-huh.
And then there's come a point where that is actually preventing them from getting to what they want, which is
Yeah.
connection, presence, peace. And just like you said, it's a very different skill. And so to take a woman who's been successful her whole life,
Mhm.
and that's where I think, even back to what we were talking about earlier, it's like being both an expert and a beginner all at the same time.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And so I think it is then it goes back to more vulnerability, to go like from really feeling competent and capable, going from feeling competent and capable to feeling like you were a baby doing something for the first time and you are falling.
Yeah.
It is, and this is
Humbling.
back where this is now we're back to the same place. That is why we need each other, is because
Yeah.
being held in that space, not being expected to do it alone, to have someone holding your hand through it, whether it's virtually or even just knowing people are out there with you, in terms of doing the work with you, is so profoundly supportive. So
Yeah.
I'm going to say it and say it and say it and say it until moms are literally waiting outside my doorstep to say,
Yeah.
we won in the community. No, I'm joking,
I know.
but I'm also not.
So it's so
So
important. Though your
yeah.
work is so important because I think that's why we're here on the planet. That's the gift of being here is connection. So
I wholeheartedly agree.
it's the
I,
most important
I'm
thing.
so
I
on
didn't
board.
I didn't want to forget though, because you keep saying, experts and beginners. I mean, it's so humbling that the more like the more training, reading I do or anything, the less I know, the less
hmm
I know. And it's
hmm
just so humbling.
It is really humbling,
Yeah.
particularly because I think our society values expertise and education and knowing.
Mhm.
Like we're not very well praised as a society for being new,
Yeah,
for
right.
being a beginner, or, like it's just not something that is valued. And I think when we already have, as caregivers, we already have a job, it's
Mhm.
not very valued among our society, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
no one, and actually, I was joking with my husband, just chatting on the phone during my lunch break. And we were just talking about, wow, like, can you even believe where we wouldn't be with all this, without all the support that we are receiving? Like, it is just, we were just like kind of in all of it.
Mhm.
And then I was, telling him, like, man, I deserve an award for all that I've done to do this.
Yeah.
And I'm joking with him, but I'm also like, I was like, wait, he's like, well, I'll have Levi make you a trophy. It's like, no, I don't want a trophy. It's just one more piece of junk.
Yeah.
I want a trip.
Yeah.
I want a bonus. No,
Yeah.
and I am still joking with him, but also I
Mhm.
think back to the whole point is that caregiving as a profession is not, you don't get the, oh, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
You don't get the
Mhm.
respect. You don't get the kudos that I think we ultimately deserve. Like, if you tell someone that you're a doctor or a lawyer or, something that earns a lot of money. And that's what our society really seems to revere. And so back to the, being a beginner, I think it's hard to hold that space for ourselves because it's so hard. It's so
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, two words just kept popping into my brain as you were talking about that because it just takes such a huge amount of faith and trust to give up that intellectual control.
Yes.
And that's I think been my challenge and how I still feel like such a beginner is because
hmm
every single day I have to go back to square one, which is like, can I have faith and trust in something bigger than myself that's
hmm
unexplainable,
hmm
that I don't have proof of, that I don't have control over? And so feels very beginner oriented because like, oh, I don't know how far down the path I am, still at the beginning of that path.
Yeah, so much so. But what you're reminding, so actually I had a conversation, I'm going to make it anonymous, but I had a conversation with somebody who's a child
Mhm.
about, it was about God and understanding different parts of him. And that was the thing. They were like, I don't know if I can trust him.
Mhm.
And so I was trying to explain, just my own personal experience and saying, I understand, that I have been there
Mhm.
and it's really hard to make sense of so much of this and
Mhm.
hard to trust the goodness of a God that would allow some of this to happen
Exactly.
and to acknowledge that and to like give voice to that. But I said, but here's the thing I know is that just like what you explained really beautifully earlier, when you do experience the profound experience of love in different ways. Like, so for me, I've experienced it. I've experienced just receiving God's love in such real and profound ways
Mhm.
that I'm like, okay, well, that was real.
Yeah.
That experience of love, of being loved and the power of love, that's real.
Mhm.
And so that's like the thing we grasp onto for like, okay, that processing our faith and trust every day, knowing that we have these like center points to go on.
Mhm.
But it is not easy.
It's not easy. It's constant work or practice, I guess. That's why they
Practice, yes.
call it practice.
Yeah, exactly
Because
right.
we'll never get there. It's like meditation practice. Everything's a practice.
It is very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I joke. I said, I'd really love for there to be a finish line, to kind of be like, okay, I'm done. I'm done
I
growing. I've
know.
got it all figured out. But that is like, and what you were saying earlier, like, I think the more you learn, the more you recognize you have, like, the more you don't know,
The less you know.
um, the less you know. And so I think likewise, and, and I think it even gets worse, worse over time
Yeah.
because as we keep learning. Okay. So let's see here. Let's start to wind it down. This is so much fun. I feel like we could geek out
I
and
know.
keep going deeper
I,
and deeper. And just as we kind of wind it down, is there anything just on your mind that you want to put in the space of our listeners before we wrap up?
it's just repetitive, but I wish that I had found this community so long ago when I was starting my journey because I just felt so isolated. And I don't know, I'm not originally from Southern California, so I don't know if it's I'm from a small town, so I'm used to like what community was like there. And when I came here and it was hard to figure out how do you fit in when your life is so far from perfect, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it,
And
and it
to
and it
your
looks
point,
like,
and you're like treading the water and like doing all the things, like how does that look like? And I guess I will close it out saying it looks like doing exactly what you had described in your own words, doing a lot of crazy things,
yeah.
trying things, to seeing
Hmm.
what feels like a safe, connected community, to see what works for you, and to essentially hold on to that thread of hope that you don't have to stay so isolated and alone, and to kind of keep digging deep in your own words again.
Yeah. Hmm. For sure. So, yeah, the community is so lucky to have you and
Well, thank you.
be providing this space for them, you know? That's for sure.
Mm. Thank you so very much. Well, lovely to speak with you. And I'm sure we'll speak again in the future, knowing that we're now mutually acquainted to our friend.
I know.
And
Thank you so
yeah,
much. Yeah, it was so
yeah,
great to meet with you. And I could just, yeah, talk forever about all these. We go down so many rabbit holes, so
I know, right?
yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
definitely. Okay. Well, thank you. And we'll see you on the next episode.